A single quiet action at an American university triggered a movement no one anticipated. What would you do when truth and silence meet? Press play to jump in. On a still night at one of the oldest universities in America, a solitary voice echoed through the darkness, and what ensued rippled across the country. What is it to take a stand on truth when the world tells us to remain silent? And when unity demands that we turn our heads from painful concepts, do we sacrifice more than we win? Tonight, we return to a moment that started with a straightforward decision, to speak or remain silent, and turned into a tipping point for a generation. Let's go back to the story. That night, Yale University's Woolsey Hall shone brightly, filled with guests and students who wanted to be part of an event titled Unity for America's Future. Standing on the podium was former President Barack Obama. His voice, warm, consistent, and packed with unspoken power, commanded everyone's attention. He spoke passionately of being together, reminding people that to be together doesn't imply that we have to agree on everything. It means we must listen to one another. The room erupted into applause. Phones flew up in the air, live streaming his words onto social media in real time. But in a dark corner of the auditorium, a guest no one had anticipated sat silently. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. He hadn't been invited. Nobody believed he'd show up, and to be honest, he wasn't even welcome. Shaded by the darkness, he might have escaped detection, had he not stood up. The quiet groan of his chair turned several heads. A student whispered in amazement, "Is that really Kennedy?" Security by the doors hardened at once, hands reaching for their radios, prepared for anything. On the stage, Obama went on, oblivious at first to the nervous ripple that began spreading through the hall. Kennedy started walking slowly down the aisle. The echoes of his boots on the wooden floor sounded with a rhythmic beat, nearly like the drum roll leading to a duel. The atmosphere changed. Tension replaced curiosity. Each gaze fell on him. A staff member gestured towards security to advance, and the air was instantly tense, as though anticipating a storm would unleash. Speedy side note before we go deeper. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these inspiring stories. Suddenly, that magnificent hall was like a powder keg, about to blow. Hearts were racing. What would come next? Obama paused, scanning the crowd. His eyes landed on the uninvited figure. The murmur of voices rose like the restless sea. A student in the middle row nervously tried to capture the scene, their fingers trembling as they held up their phone to record the drama. Then, with his trademark calm, Obama tilted his head slightly and said in a firm but respectful tone, "Sir, I'm afraid." Obama's voice remained calm, courteous but insistent, like a person establishing a limit without shouting. "You're not on the invitation list. Please leave so we may proceed." His words were polite, yet packed the punch of an authority that commanded compliance. Two security guards, their black earpieces visible only by a hair, started moving in Kennedy's direction from either end of the hall. One of them called out into his radio, but Kennedy didn't even break pace. Step by deliberate step, he walked towards an empty microphone at the end of the stage. His movement was slow, calculated, as if every step had been mapped out ages ago. The room divided in half. Students leapt to their feet, cheering as if anticipating this interruption. Others remained in their seats, shaking their heads, grumbling about the chaos this was becoming. A professor located near the front frowned intently, holding the event program as though it could stabilize the growing tension. Kennedy approached the microphone, his hand brushing against the switch. The quiet click as he flipped it on seemed louder than it might have, like the noise itself had broken through the dense hush, a point of no return. He spoke directly at Obama, his voice booming in the hall with the familiar Louisiana drawl, punctuated with a touch of rural humor. "Mr. Obama, I have no intention of ruining your fine party here," he said. a slight smirk playing on his lips. "But when it comes to unity, I reckon I've got a few words worth considering." The audience responded in a flash. Some of them laughed, that nervous laughter that escapes when things are just too tense. Others whistled, not with humor, but with rage or disappointment. In the third row, a young woman whispered to her friend, her eyes aglow with the excitement of the moment. He dared to actually do it. Obama did not shift much, only folded his arms and observed, his eyes intense and fixed, slicing through the commotion. He motioned to the security detail to stop with a slight movement. It was not boisterous or theatrical, but impactful. The cue bore the subtle power of a person who understood when to restrain himself, hoping to see if this would be followed by an actual exchange of something worthwhile or merely a meaningless spectacle. Kennedy reached into his coat, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. His voice boomed through the speakers as he held it up for all to see. "These kids," he began, "these are the conservative students at Yale who invited me here to speak honestly, to say things no one dares to say, but your organizers, afraid I'd ruin their perfectly scripted event, rejected that invitation." He let that stand for a moment, then said, his tone now piercing with challenge, "So tell me, Mr. Obama, what kind of unity is this?" Sparse applause erupted, some applauding in sympathy, others booing strenuously. The air was charged with tension. A boy student wearing glasses yelled out, his voice ringing over the din, "Speak, Senator! Tell us!" In the background, meanwhile, in one corner of the hall, someone growled under his breath, annoyance clear in his voice. "So disrespectful." The cameras of the student journalism crew swiveled slowly across the scene, picking up Kennedy's determined look, then Obama's wary stare, and finally panning over the tense faces of the audience. They seemed to sense that they were watching something that no one would ever forget soon. Kennedy stood strong, his gaze scanning the room, attempting to reach every individual in the room. His speech slowed, each sentence crashing with intention and emphasis. "I'm not here to make trouble, or make a scandal, or stir up the pot," he started, firm and confident. "But if unity is just saying what you want to hear, if unity is covering up the truth with a bright, shiny surface, well, that's not unity. That's control. That's dressing up a blindfold and calling it peace, muzzling people with sugary-sounding words that don't have any substance." His words struck a chord, like arrows piercing the hearts of those who'd been resisting the deeper truths. Some students rose up, applauding as if they'd been waiting for someone to put it in words. Others sat stiff, shaking their heads, faces flushed with rage, refusing to hear what they perceived as an attack. The entire room was charged, crackling with tension, excitement, and the inexorable power of unvarnished words. This wasn't about one speech. It was about truth, courage, and the type of unity that isn't forced or phony. Unity that's real, rooted in something. Kennedy breathed deeply, his eyes locking with Obama's once more. His voice softened, as if he was placing his hopes in the hands of the future. "We can be different. We can argue. We can even be on opposite sides of the line. But let's not allow those differences create a wall between us. Let them create a bridge to understanding, to respect. That is what true unity is. Unity based on truth, on freedom." For one moment, the auditorium was silent. Then, as if a dam was burst, applause swept across the hall. It rose to a deafening level, not only from Kennedy supporters, but from some who had a moment before been shaking their heads. The force of his words was hard to resist. Obama remained at the podium, a slight smile dancing on his lips. But his eyes revealed the tension of the moment. He moved over to the central microphone, his voice steady, but with a quiet bite. "Senator Kennedy, I appreciate your opinion," he declared, measured and firm. "But this is a place for structured discussion. If you desire a debate, there are more suitable places for that." His words elicited applause from the other half of the hall, those who believed the evening's order had to be re-established. But Kennedy didn't blink. His voice remained firm, respectful, yet prepared. "With all due respect, sir." Now Kennedy's tone grew sharper, laced with only a touch of sarcasm. "If you decide who gets to talk and who has to remain silent," he said firmly and clearly, "that's not dialogue. That's a script, and I'm not too keen on acting." One sentence ignited the room. Cheers meshed with boos and tense laughter. The emotion surged, wild, uncontrolled. Security closed in, poised to step in, but Kennedy refused to budge, clutching the microphone as if pinning himself to the tempest. His eyes remained fixed on Obama, unapologetic and unflinching, daring him to ride this moment out. Close to the stage, an event coordinator, pale with concern, hurried over to a professor sitting in the front to lean in and whisper something urgently. The air in the hall was strained like a lit fuse, waiting for the last spark. Kennedy stood at the cusp of pandemonium, the room thick with noise and heat, his eyes cutting like steel as he scanned the agitated crowd. Standing at the podium, Obama remained outwardly calm, but if you listened carefully, his hands were holding the lectern just a notch tighter, a small fissure in his customary serenity. The team of guards remained rigid, their eyes darting between the two men, anticipating the cue that would determine what would happen next. Kennedy's voice fell low, but sliced through the din like a cut. "Mr. Obama talks about unity, and who doesn't want that?" he started, his voice tranquil but provocative. "But what sort of unity is it when you determine who speaks and who is silent?" The room erupted again. Applause, whistles, catcalls, all intertwined in a wave building upward. One student in the middle row yelled, "Keep going!" while another shook her head, saying, "So rude." But Kennedy didn't blink. He leaned in closer to the mic, as if he wanted every phrase to be etched forever. "You planned this event, handpicked the guests, chose the questions." He held up that same crumpled sheet of paper, an emblem now of the showdown. "These kids, they wanted me here. They wanted a real debate. But you forbade it. Scared the truth would ruin your neat script." Once more, the hall came alive. Some of the students sprang to their feet, the yellow light of the chandeliers dancing across their faces, so that the setting seemed almost a fire taking hold. Kennedy spoke lower, slowing down his words, as a storyteller leaning into the light of the campfire. "Unity isn't where everybody bends their head in agreement. It's not sweeping our differences under the rug just to have peace. Genuine unity, that's when we have the courage to hear perspectives that make us cringe, words that make us want to turn away or flee. Without that, what you describe as unity, that is tyranny, wrapped up in a classy attire. It's suffocating freedom under nice applause." His words hung over the audience like a smoldering fuse, dense and unerasable. For an interminable heartbeat, the room sat in stunned electric quiet. Then it exploded into... Opposing responses spread through the hall. From one corner, a burst of muscular applause sounded, like stoking Kennedy's brash message. But equally strongly, indignant boos resounded on the other side, charging the air with a tension that seemed almost palpable. By the stage, a white-haired professor stood shaking his head softly, furiously writing away in a tiny notebook, as if resolved to note every phrase of this incredible confrontation. Obama moved forward, nearer to the microphone, his eyes fixed on Kennedy. His tone remained warm, measured, but now sharpened. "Senator," he started, "I strongly believe debate is vital. It's the blood that runs through the veins of a free and progressive society. But cutting off a conversation, sabotaging an event like this one, that's not demonstrating respect. That's not how we find truth." A wave of gentle applause followed his words, rising from part of the audience. It was the applause of those who wanted calm restored, who valued civility and order in the midst of this heated exchange. But Kennedy? He only smiled. That kind of smile that's part defiance, part challenge, as if saying without words, "I'm not done yet." He turned slightly, his voice now laced with both mockery and conviction. "Disrupting?" he repeated, his eye cocked up. "When a regular person says something and gets shut down, you label it order. When I'm standing over here telling you things you don't want to hear, you label it disruption. But I don't label it that. I label it truth. And truth always gets people upset. Truth always makes people want to turn away, perhaps even flee." The hall burst out once more. Cheers from the people who were inspired by his bravery. Shouts of protest from the people who felt he had crossed a line as loudly. The air was thick, bubbling, electric, as if the air itself was holding its breath to see who would give in. A harried-looking event organizer, cheeks red with the burden of responsibility, rushed over to quietly speak to a standing security guard nearby, obviously eager to end this standoff. But before the guard could intervene, Obama made a discreet but authoritative hand gesture. Not yet. He wanted to listen to Kennedy first. Sensing that the room's full focus was on him, Kennedy raised his voice, each word burning with the fire of conviction. "I'm not standing here to be some hero. I'm not here to stir up trouble," he said, his tone sincere. "I'm standing here for these kids." He swept his arm toward the young faces watching with wide eyes. "For their future. For people who are worthy of the truth, not some tidy, scripted account. And if you believe the truth is an annoyance, if you perceive it as a danger, then the issue isn't me. The issue is that you're afraid of confronting it." His words swept through the building like a gust of fierce wind, stirring something deep within, provoking, rousing. For an instant, it seemed as if this was what democracy actually sounded like, not a reassuring echo of agreement, but a brash call to think, to question, to stand together on the grounds of truth. Regardless of how fractured or angry the crowd had become, now it bellowed like a feral sea, the passion impossible to hold in. A boy in a Yale hoodie stood, his fist held high in support, his own face flushed with fire. Behind the stage, a girl waved her phone, filming through a haze of tears that shone in her eyes. The student news crew's cameras swung back and forth, eager to catch every unedited, unforgettable moment. In the corner, a teaching assistant whispered to a colleague, "This is going to be big." Kennedy, seeing the security team moving in, took a cautious step back, but held on to the microphone for one more second. His voice increased, strong and strong, like a last utterance. "One last thing," he said, his tone ringing through the hall like a promise. "If unity means staying silent before the truth, I'd rather be escorted out than bow my head." He set the microphone down. Soft click as it hit the stand sounded like the period at the end of a powerful speech. Immediately, security intervened. A guard firmly but gently took Kennedy by the arm and escorted him toward the side door. The audience responded in two waves. Half the room erupted in thunderous applause, while the other half hissed, voices raised in a confused cry for order. As Kennedy vanished through the doorway, shouts of "Speak freely" rang out behind him. Phone screens gleamed throughout the hall, illuminating the dimmed room as updates poured onto social media in real time. A student wrote, "Kennedy just shook Yale." Brief 15-second video, Kennedy's remark on tyranny clad in an expensive suit, was posted hundreds of times within minutes, racing like wildfire. On stage, Obama stood quietly, his gaze tracing the route Kennedy had departed. His expression was serene, but contemplative, a man considering what had just transpired and what it indicated beyond this one night. Within hours, outside Woolsey Hall, the energy still vibrated like a furnace. Clusters of students huddled, arguing hotly, their phones glowing softly as they rewound and replayed the drama of the night. That 22-second video clip, Kennedy at the mic, announcing unity without truth is just tyranny in a fine suit, caught fire on social media like a spark igniting dry brush. Mainstream media wasted no time in responding. Fox News put up a headline: Senator Kennedy challenges Obama, defends free speech. CNN entitled it, A Political Stunt Disrupts Unity Event. Commentators were divided. Some welcomed Kennedy as a hero telling painful truths, while others branded him as an opportunist, hijacking Obama's moment to promote himself. An MSNBC analyst commented, "This isn't free speech, it's pointless disruption." On TikTok, the reaction videos rolled in rapidly. One Yale student, whose hair was dyed bright green, uploaded an emotional video. "Kennedy's right," she started. "If you only invite people who agree with you, that's not unity." The student's TikTok video, raw and emotional, gained millions of views overnight. But then the backlash hit as well. Another student's clip condemned Kennedy's behavior. "He disrupted a safe space. Obama deserved respect," they stated in their firm, hurt tone, and thus the lines were drawn on social media. Social media became a virtual battlefield, with people's opinions colliding vehemently across Twitter, TikTok, and more. Feeling the storm brewing, Obama made a post of his own, a cautious effort to calm the story. "Unity demands discussion, but also order. We can argue without interruption." The post attracted thousands of likes, but the comments were mixed. Some endorsed his appeal to decency, others called him out. "Your order is muzzling others." Obama supporters lashed back with vigor. "Kennedy had no right to appropriate the event," they posted. "That was not courage, it was disrespect." The controversy engulfed beyond college borders, drawing in celebrities, political pundits, and public figures. But Kennedy? As opposed to the sound, he remained silent. He refused to give any interviews. He wrote nothing. The sole evidence of his existence was a hazy picture taken as he departed Yale, hands stuffed into his pockets, his face serene, almost aloof. That silence, whether purposeful or not, only served to fuel the intrigue, setting him apart even further in the chaos. And the storm wasn't limited to the internet. In cafes close to Yale, Book Trader, Blue State, small out-of-the-way spots where students congregated, the argument raged as fiercely. Clusters of students over coffee rewound Kennedy's speech on their phones. "He said what everyone thinks but won't say," said one student, voice low but resolute. Another shook their head. "No. He just wanted to cause trouble, get a headline." And then there was a dramatic turn. A Yale student, who claimed to be among the conservative students who had originally invited Kennedy, wrote a lengthy thread on X, formerly Twitter. In it, they explained how the organizers of the event pushed their group to rescind the invitation. "They told us Kennedy would destabilize things." "But destabilize what? Their control?" the student posted. The thread went viral overnight and caught the attention of investigative reporters. The Atlantic published a considered article, "The Yale Incident, Free Speech and the Modern University." It showed how campuses across the world are grappling with the fine balance between inclusivity and free speech. On TikTok, a fresh trend emerged. Students recorded themselves standing in front of dummy microphones, gravely reciting Kennedy's words on truth and tyranny. One particular clip, from a student at Berkeley, bore the caption, "If truth is disruption, then I choose disruption." It was shared and reposted millions of times, becoming a rallying cry. Commentators started referring to it as the Kennedy moment, a token of defiance, of defying what some perceived as ideological domination in contemporary institutions. Even among Yale's own teaching staff, the controversy howled. One professor wrote a blog entry on the university's website. "This event demonstrates we need to re-examine how we structure debates." Meanwhile, on one of the most popular podcasts, a different professor made the contrary case. "Kennedy's behavior was irresponsible," he said. "He killed a potential for real dialogue." Both arguments were paraphrased, argued about, and analyzed everywhere, fueling the building discussion. At nightfall, Speak Freely wasn't merely a battle cry on a passionate night, it was a movement. Social media was filled with posts. Men and women from every corner of the community wrote about their own experiences of having been censored in school, at work, or on the internet. I was let go for voicing a dissenting opinion. Kennedy spoke for me. My school silenced conservative speakers. This isn't unity. And such as stones cast into a quiet lake, these tales sent out ripples which widened and widened, alienating, questioning, alerting. The media firestorm that followed the Yale incident did not burn itself out. It expanded into a wildfire, jumping from phone screens to college campuses nationwide. In a matter of days, colleges on the East Coast to the West Coast were caught up in surges of protests, angry arguments, and fiery demands for reform. At Stanford, students occupied the central quad with homemade signs that read, "Free speech or nothing." They set up an open mic where anyone, conservatives, progressives, and all points in between, could stand and be heard. An engineering student, his voice shaking but with determination, spoke about his experience. How a professor had instructed him to halt debating because he was off message. Someone videotaped his account. It became a hit on TikTok, inspiring thousands of supportive comments. "Speak Freely is for people like him," wrote one user. There were even bigger protests at Berkeley, a campus with a long history of student activism. Hundreds of students occupied Sproul Plaza, crying out in unison as they marched and chanted, "Let us speak." An internet petition that called for the university to change its guest speaker policies received more than 10,000 signatures in less than 1 week. A senior student on the stairs outside of the administration building shouted so everyone could hear, "If Yale can silence Kennedy, who's next?" The incident was filmed, and her statement became a slogan, passed from campus to campus and via social media. And yet, amid it all, John Kennedy, grudgingly at the eye of the hurricane, said nothing. He turned down every interview request. The only glimpse of him came in a grainy, quick video someone shot as he left a grocery store back in Louisiana, wearing that familiar half-smirk, as if watching the world from the sidelines. His absence didn't slow the movement. It seemed to fuel it. A post that went viral summed it up. "Kennedy doesn't need to go on TV. He lit the spark. Now we keep it burning." The post, which was shared thousands of times, contained images of protesting students at UCLA, carrying signs, determination on their faces. Sensing the heat, Obama spoke of the problem in a short podcast interview. His tone was even, reflective. "I do believe in open discussion," he replied, "but we do need places where folks feel comfortable arguing." He admitted that the Yale controversy had injected an invaluable national conversation, but reminded listeners that unity, real, lasting unity, had to continue to be the objective. But the wave of activism didn't stop at universities. High school students began speaking up, questioning speech policies at their own schools. In Chicago, a group of teens organized an online symposium inspired by Kennedy's stand and boldly invited speakers their administrators might have deemed too controversial. A 16-year-old summed up their resolve, "If adults are afraid to debate, we'll do it." The clip of that fearless 16-year-old uploaded to TikTok had millions of views within no time, and with each share, the pressure increased. Bit by bit, universities started reacting. Stanford came out with a new open forum policy, vowing to invite speakers on all sides of the political divide. At Berkeley, officials altered their guest speaker policies, promising full disclosure in the manner in which speakers were selected. Even universities such as NYU attempted to be responsive, hosting workshops on free speech, though not without controversy. Several faculty members resisted, labeling the movement destabilizing and advising it could prove damaging. At Yale, a professor admitted in an essay for the Chronicle of Higher Education. We've grown too comfortable controlling the narrative. It was a rare moment of self-reflection that resonated with many, but not everyone was on Kennedy's side. A group of Yale students stepped forward at a campus press conference, offering an apology for the disruption at Obama's event. Unity, not division, one of them declared, their tone resolute but optimistic. But in cyberspace, their apology was scorned. There were comments labeling it as cowardly. There was one that went viral and said, "Apologizing for the truth? Pathetic." Meanwhile, Kennedy's critics were not shy. Columnists and commentators dubbed him a troublemaker, suggesting he was taking advantage of students, using the incident as a platform to advance a conservative agenda. The argument raged on. But amidst all the clamor, one thing was certain. The Yale incident had done more than ignite a series of headlines. It had roused a generation of students no longer content to remain silent. They weren't only rebelling against the ability to speak, but against the ability to listen to opposing voices, to listen to uncomfortable truths that other people might rather not share. And even though Kennedy remained in the background, refusing to give speeches or interviews, his picture of him at that podium, standing alone and defiant in front of a full house, became their battle standard. His quiet presence represented something greater than an individual or a single evening. But as with every movement, aggressive headwinds followed. Kennedy, who had been a reluctant storm figure, now stood in the middle of it. Criticism grew more biting. Personal insults cluttered opinion pages. Legal threats appeared. Meanwhile, student leaders within the Speak Freely movement also felt the squeeze, as some attempted to smother the flames that had been lit by Kennedy. Within days of the Yale incident, a team of lawyers acting for the organizers wrote to Kennedy with a formal warning letter. Kennedy was accused of trespassing and interfering with public order. One large news site went with the headline, "Kennedy could be sued for disrupting Obama event." Although no lawsuit ever arrived, the threat itself sparked another round of hot debate. "They want to silence Kennedy using the law. Sad," somebody posted. Another retorted, "He brought it on himself. Nobody invited him." Meanwhile, the Yale students who had initially extended an invitation to Kennedy were not exempted from the backlash. One, under pressure from the administration, resigned from and so even with the snowballing pressure from legal threats, personal insults, and constant condemnation, Kennedy and the student-led Speak Freely movement never wavered. What began as one dramatic moment at Yale was no longer merely a solitary event. It was a turning student council quietly. Another was nearly driven out of her mind by anonymous threatening letters, messages so unsettling that she locked down her social media presence and went dark for a while. But through all these, they were not entirely isolated. A small but unbowed group of Yale students staged a low-key rally on campus. They waved a simple, compelling banner, "Truth doesn't need permission." Someone took a photo and posted it online. That photo, students standing upright, their message unmistakable, spread like fire. It galvanized student groups at NYU and Texas A&M to adopt the same banner at their own rallies. Kennedy, for all the whirling controversy, was as intransigent as ever. In a fleeting moment caught on tape, a reporter shouted over his shoulder as he emerged from a meeting, "Senator, do you regret what happened at Yale?" Kennedy didn't even slow his pace. He shrugged ever so slightly and said, "Regret? I just said what needed to be said. The rest is up to others to decide." Those simple 3 words, plain, sharp, unshaken, glowed on social media once more. They were shortly printed on T-shirts, written on banners, and chanted at rallies. "I just said what needed saying." Point. A moment when thousands of young people sent the message clear. They would no longer be silent. They would no longer abide a version of unity that consisted of agreeing to please, and in the shadow of the backlash, the insults, the threats, the sabers drawn in the form of lawsuits, the torch of Speak Freely remained lit. It waited for the day it would burn even brighter. A year after, the term John Kennedy no longer referred to simply a senator from Louisiana. It had transcended to something more, a symbol of a new era. A new era where culture of debate changed, where Speak Freely made an indelible impact not just on college campuses, but on how society discussed free speech. The Yale incident was not a flash in the pan. It became a landmark, a legend written into books and into the memories of an entire generation that would not let it be forgotten. Universities, places once famous for restricted speech, started to transform. Harvard launched a free forum, giving students the power to invite speakers from any perspective, without needing a stamp of approval from administrators. Berkeley introduced clear public guidelines to make sure guest selections were transparent. Even smaller schools like Amherst stepped up, hosting uncensored debates where students faced uncomfortable opposing views head-on. As one Amherst student wrote in the campus paper, "We're no longer afraid of disagreement." That's the abiding lesson of Yale. Kennedy's call to action, "Unity without truth is just tyranny in a fine suit," survived long after that volatile night. It transcended being simply a slogan bellowed in a packed hall. It turned into a battle cry. The words were found in political science texts, stamped on the cover of essay books on free speech, and written on posters plastered on student forums nationwide. In one of the Stanford lectures, a teacher referred to it as a reminder that truth, however difficult to listen to, is the basis of all true dialogue. And Kennedy, the man himself, kept on holding back. He hardly ever mentioned Yale, only making the occasional colloquial, understated remark when prodded by reporters. Speaking at a Louisiana hometown function when asked about the Speak Freely movement, he just shrugged and said, "I just said what I saw. You young folks did the rest." That quiet, unassuming answer was captured on film and widely posted online. It only reinforced his reputation as a man who had not lobbied for the limelight, but who, whether he willed it or not, had become a champion of something far larger than himself. Even Barack Obama, in his characteristic nuance, started to quietly change his tack. Speaking months later at an education conference, he admitted the value of honest-to-goodness debates. "We learn the most when we encounter ideas that make us uncomfortable," he declared. While he did not mention Kennedy by name, many interpreted it as a tacit nod to the Speak Freely campaign. Some people praised the remarks in the hope that they represented genuine change. Others were not convinced. "Nice words," one observer wrote, "but will he follow through?" The Yale incident soon found its way into classrooms, a contemporary case study in political science, media studies, and more. Students everywhere picked it apart, looking at how Kennedy defied power within institutions, how social media escalated his message, and how a single surprise moment became a conversation for the nation. At NYU, even a professor created an entire course called Free Speech in the Digital Age. One student in that class wrote on their blog, "Yale taught me that one person, one moment, can change an entire system." And outside of college campuses, the impact of Speak Freely spread throughout wider society. Technology companies, long decried for their content censorship practices, started teaching workshops on free expression. Certain nonprofits created initiatives designed to support voices that felt silenced. One of the most prominent was Mike for All, a project started by Mike Tyson and his Yale alumni friends. It created an internet-based space where users were free to express opinions without fear of eradication, brought directly from Kennedy's stance. Space was able to attract thousands of users interested in engaging the dialogue. Some of the changes were not smooth, of course. Some universities were against the momentum of the movement. Teachers at those institutions contended that free speech should not override psychological safety. These arguments raged on, and they were not easy ones. But change was underway, like a river that could no longer be contained. As the New York Times noted in a reflection piece, the Yale incident was a wake-up call, We cannot build unity by silencing dissent. And amidst it all, Kennedy, always reluctant to steal the spotlight, was a presence who persisted in the public consciousness. At a Texas university, students painted a mural of him at a microphone, the phrase, "Speak freely," written boldly beneath. When a journalist later questioned him about the mural, Kennedy simply smiled and told him, "I look better in person." That simple humor, combined with his resolute reserve, kept his memory alive. Colleges became more liberated. Students gained the courage to tell the truth, even when it hurt. The Yale episode came to be understood not merely as one evening of mischief, but as a genuine turning point. It rewrote history in the way schools approached conversation and argument, and more significantly, it ignited a new faith. That truth, however difficult to listen to, is always worth the struggle for. In the open forums that flowered nationwide, Kennedy's spirit, humble yet uncompromising, seemed to lead the way. That instant in Woolsey Hall became like a rock tossed into a pond, sending ripples outward, ripples that extended far beyond college campuses, touching the larger world. And when the dust of that storm had settled a year hence, the tale of John Kennedy standing firm to defy Barack Obama wasn't merely a recollection. It was a reminder of the strength of voice, of the price of silence. The Speak Freely movement had changed campuses and left each of us with an echo. When you are pressured, what will you do? Imagine that night once more. Kennedy, a simple man in scuffed boots, emerging from the darkness of the back row, standing in front of the stage lights, standing before hundreds of eyes. No script, no assurances, simply the belief that truth had to be told. That great single act, lit a fire that rumbled against the walls of authority in universities and beyond. But ultimately, the question wasn't one for Kennedy alone. It was one for all those who saw it, for all those who have heard the tale since. On one evening, in the same hall at Yale, now the setting for a newly established free forum, a freshman stood at a microphone. Her hands shook just minutely as she addressed the crowd of unknown faces. "I was told to be quiet in class because my opinion was different," she declared, her voice ringing through the speakers. "I was afraid. But then I thought about someone who stood here right here, being brave enough to speak up when the world wanted him quiet." The room was quiet for a moment, and then went wild with applause, as if Kennedy's ghost was alive in each word she said. "Unity," she went on. Obama once described unity as a noble ideal, but what is unity if it demands you to bury your opinions and swallow the truth? That was the question that Kennedy, with his surprise gesture, compelled the entire nation to ask. He didn't give us the answer. He left that for each of us to find out for ourselves. Far from Yale, in the classroom of a high school in Ohio, a teacher inspired by that moment in Woolsey Hall chose to do something different. She started allowing her students to debate freely, even on the most controversial issues. The ripples continued to spread. Because when the lights dimmed in the stage at Woolsey Hall, when the posts and the headlines fell silent, that question still echoed. And not just for anyone sitting in the audience on that day. It's for all of us. When you stand at your own microphone, be it an actual one or just a time in life when the pressure weighs heavily and silence sounds more convenient, what will you do? Will you bow your head? Or will you speak, even though your voice shakes, even though the world turns its back? The decision is yours to make. The tale of John Kennedy challenging Barack Obama at Yale, with Speak Freely at its center, tells us of a profoundly divided America, one in which free speech is both a valued right and a hotly contested terrain. Kennedy, in his scuffed boots and down-home drawl, had the temerity to take the microphone, uninvited, and confront the sort of unity that conceals control. His saying, "Unity without truth is simply tyranny in a good suit," is a reminder that truth, difficult as it may be to listen to, is the foundation of authentic dialogue. The Speak Freely campaign, spreading from social media to college campuses such as Stanford and Berkeley, demonstrated the power of young people asserting their right to speak and to listen to differing opinions. But it also cost something. Kennedy was beset by vicious attacks and threats of lawsuits. Students at Yale who invited him were pressured by their university. In modern America, where every argument is magnified on social media and schools still struggle with free speech, the moral of this tale is unmistakable. Be bold enough to tell the truth, but prepare yourself for what follows. Because when you speak up, as that Yale freshman did at Free Forum, voice trembling but firm, you're not only standing up for yourself, you're standing up for all those who have been silenced. So select your times and your words carefully. Notice how even Obama changed his position, recognizing the merit of open discussion. But most of all, don't be afraid to speak out. Whether in the workplace, in school, or in your home, recall Kennedy's model. Truth is worth the risk. But it takes courage. And it takes accountability. And as we close this story, we leave you with one final question. When the pressure mounts, will you remain silent, or will you have the courage to stand at the microphone even in your heart? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel to keep the Speak Freely spirit going, and stick with us for more uplifting stories. We'll catch you in the next one.